From the land of Grant University in Urbana-Champaign, Illinois, this is the Closing Market Report. It is the 19th day of March 2025. I'm Extension's Todd Gleason. Coming up, we'll talk about the commodity markets with Greg Johnson. He's at TGM, that's Total Grain Marketing, the elevator here in Champaign County. We'll hear from Rod Bain at USDA about conservation efforts that are still underway today that are rooted deeply into the dust storms of the mid-1930s. And then as we close out our time together, we'll talk more about the weather. We'll do that with Drew Lerner. He's at World Weather Incorporated, all on this Wednesday edition of the Closing Market Report from Illinois Public Media. It is public radio for the farming world, online, on demand, anytime you'd like to listen to us at willag.org, willag.org, or search us out in your favorite podcast applications.
Todd Gleason services are made available to WILL by University of Illinois Extension.
Greg Johnson from TGM, that's TotalGrainMarketing.com, now joins us to discuss the marketplace, anything but the marketplace today. Greg, I think we should talk about what really are you watching over the last 24 hours? There actually was quite a bit of news, mostly about the acreage report. What kinds of numbers are we seeing?
Yeah. The USDA will release the official numbers on March 31st, but we've got the private analysts starting to come out with their estimates, and S&P Global, which formerly was known as Informa, came out with their numbers overnight, and they increased corn acres from 93.5 to 94.3 million acres of corn. Just for reference, the USDA Ag Outlook Forum was at 94.0 million, and last year we planted 90.6. So a little bit higher on corn acres, according to Informa. The soybean number they left exactly unchanged at 83.3 million acres. That compares to 84.0 at the USDA Ag Outlook Forum, and compares to 87.1 million acres is what we planted last year. S&P Global lowered their wheat acres a little bit, right in line with the USDA Ag Outlook number, and they lowered cotton acres a little bit. Now they're also right in line with the Ag Outlook Forum. So not a lot of change there, other than the corn acres did go up. If we'd actually see a 94 point something million number, that probably would not be considered friendly if the USDA comes out with that big of a number on March 31st. But those are the kind of numbers that I think the trade is kind of looking for, somewhere in that 93.5 to 94.5 million acre range on corn.
Yeah, and Allendale brought their numbers out as well. They were at 93.981 for corn. That's up, 3.387 million from USDA's 94, but lower by about 800 million acres than what S&P Global came out with. Their soybean figure was at 84.283, 84 from USDA. What was S&P Global on their soybean again?
Unchanged at 83.3.
Yeah, so they're higher for their soybeans. Their wheat number, USDA at 47. This is where the big change is, I think, and Allendale at just 45.863. So a much lower number there.
That would definitely be friendly wheat if that in fact turns out to be the case, and it may. So that's definitely something to keep an eye on.
Other news that came out: the payments from USDA available to sign up for starting today, but if you should just get a form in the mail, pre-filled out, so shouldn't be much that you have to do. Otherwise, you need to go to the FSA office. And then something that's important, I suppose, to the farmdoc team and in general, because this does roll into other things, particularly for the farmdoc team and the FBFM folks, the county yields apparently are going to be reinstated. Although I think from what you told me that's not coming out from USDA NAS this month like normal. It's being delayed?
Correct. They made the announcement today that they will release those estimates. They weren't sure whether they would have the funding for that earlier, but they must have found some funding somewhere, because today they said that the county estimates for corn, soybeans, and sorghum will be released on May 6th, cotton May 12th, cattle May 13th, and rice and peanuts May 23rd. So we will get those county estimates eventually. We normally get them in March, but due to the delay, I'm not even sure if they've actually completed all the surveys. So they probably have to do the surveys and then compile all those numbers. But at least we get them on May 6th. So we will have a number at some point in time.
Yeah, interestingly enough, if I'm thinking about this correctly, that survey, the funding for that particular set of numbers was cut as a cost savings measure, and now it's being reinstated. It's interesting just to think about how and why that all takes place. I know that the ag economists, not only here but across the nation, tend to use those numbers, so they were really important for the agricultural economists to have, and for the farmdoc team to be able to figure out all kinds of things related to what's happening on the farms, not only here but across the Midwest. We probably ought to some point talk a little bit about the price of corn and soybeans. The trade today for corn is bumping up against, or down, I suppose, against a moving average. Is that right?
Yeah, there's a 200-day moving average on the May corn contract at 454 and 3/4. It is very important if you're a technical trader, if you're a fund trader, i.e., to keep above that, because a close below that level would signal more selling pressure. And the funds are still long about 1.1 billion bushels of corn. They were long 1.8 billion, so they've almost cut their long position in half in the corn contract, but they still have a very sizable long position. And if we would close below that 200-day moving average, that could send a signal to the funds to bail out of even more corn. So we'd like to keep that corn market, that May contract, above 454 and 3/4. And so far today we are. Corn's been bouncing a penny or two on either side of unchanged. So far so good. And I think basically we're just waiting for the March 31 acreage report to tell us which way we're going to go. But until then, it just seems like we're choppy sideways.
One of the other numbers that Allendale released today was crop sales. These are all collected from producers across a series of states. I don't quite recall. 23 states, they say. I don't know how many surveys were collected, but they say that old crop corn this year is now 77% sold. Last year it was 68%. How's basis been reacting? I mean, farmers were behind. They clearly did a good job of making sales. Basis probably should eventually start to close up, just because if that much corn has been sold after it's moved, somebody's going to go looking for it, I would think.
You're right. Ever since that January 11th crop report, when the price rallied, farmers sold heavily into that rally, and it was the right thing to do, and I'm glad they did. But all that grain moving in a short period of time, I compare it to a fall harvest. The market doesn't need all the corn in a 1 month, 2 month time frame, but there was enough grain sold in that time that the end users were covered for probably 2 to 3 months. And so, as we kind of expected, basis levels really went into the tank in response to the increased farmer selling. Now, with the market having sold back off again, farm selling has dried up, and we have seen an improvement in basis. We're still what I would call in a relatively weak relatively weak basis, but it is probably 5 to 6 cents better than where it was 2 weeks ago, and it should probably continue to improve, especially if the farmers don't sell that last 20% of the crop anytime soon. We should see basis levels continue to improve.
What are farmers asking you when they call these days?
Everybody's got their eye on the drought, how dry it is. I shouldn't say drought, I should say dry conditions. It's dry out west. The rains that we get have been underperforming. If they call for an inch of rain, we get 3/10 of an inch of rain. So we're definitely in a dry pattern. But I think everybody realizes that dry weather in March doesn't mean as much as dry weather in July. So farmers are keeping an eye on the weather. I think people are concerned. There are some private forecasters calling for increased chances of drought this summer, primarily west of the Mississippi River, which if we have to have a drought, I'm all for west of the Mississippi River, since I'm east of the Mississippi River. But the weather is probably going to be a continuing, ongoing thing to monitor, because 94, 95 million acres of corn is fine, but we still have to have something close to a trend line yield to meet the demand. If we have something dramatically below trend line yield, even with the extra acres, that would cause corn prices to go higher. So I think that's what farmers are looking at. Short term, the March 31 acreage report, but longer term, weather conditions.
Indeed. Here at my home in Muhammad, we've had 3.78 inches of rainfall since the 1st of January. 6.85 is the normal, but making up 3 inches of rain isn't that big a deal at this point. The later in the season you get, if that continues to pile up, then things start to become a problem. And I think we may get another 7/10 over the next 7 days. So we'll see how that all goes. Thank you for being with us today, Greg.
Good to be with you, Todd.
Greg Johnson is with TGM. That's TotalGrainMarketing.com. Let's talk more about dry conditions and drought, but we'll look deeper into history now and the U.S. government as it's related to the Dust Bowl era. Localized soil conservation efforts were underway before the Dust Bowl, but the dust storm played a key role in creating the USDA program that now focuses on nationwide conservation. Rod Bain from the agency files this report.
March is a very notable month in history for the Agriculture Department agency known as the Natural Resources Conservation Service.
In March 1935, President Roosevelt moved the agency from the Department of Interior to the USDA, where its name changed from Soil Erosion Service to Soil Conservation Service, part to kind of give it a more positive name, what you're trying to do here.
But just as important, according to NRCS historian Shelby Calloway,
Congress took up the question also in March of establishing it as sort of a permanent conservation service to combat soil erosion. Clock was ticking. Temporary funding that had provided for the soil erosion service was set to expire, and so we kind of needed to do something.
And the backdrop to all this change and movement in federal soil conservation efforts, the Dust Bowl era of the mid-1930s.
Major dust storms that had been mostly localized in the Midwest during the early 30s were by 1934 increasingly getting bigger and bigger, and you're getting soil particles all the way out to the Atlantic Ocean. This is soil from Kansas. On March 6th and March 21st, 1935, there were dust clouds from the Midwest in the sky over Washington, D.C.
The timing of that second dust storm was fortuitous for the director of the Soil Erosion Service and champion of soil conservation, Hugh Hammond Bennett.
On March 20th, just as we've got dust clouds rolling in around that kind of time, there was a subcommittee in the House hearing on soil conservation, and Hugh Hammond Bennett is there testifying, and he sort of used the timely arrival of these dust storms on March 21st to kind of dramatically make the case that soil erosion is not a localized or regional issue. This is a national menace. Fighting it demands an organized national solution.
And after the House subcommittee hearings concluded on March 25th, 1935,
by April 23rd, there was a bill for creating a permanent soil conservation service on the president's desk, and President Roosevelt signed the Soil Conservation Act April 27th, 1935, creating the permanent soil conservation service in the USDA.
Calloway notes the irony of the timing of dramatic dust storms over the nation's capital, looming as Hugh Hammond Bennett advocated for a permanently funded soil conservation program before Congress.
That dramatic image of dust storms over Washington really ties the creation of this agency to the Dust Bowl, but it's important to remember that for Bennett, erosion wasn't usually so dramatic. It's this insidious kind of creeping evil, and he would use that word evil, best represented by this slow, relentless, waterborne sheet erosion that just very slowly impoverishes fields across the South and the Midwest. That dramatic combination of big gaping gullies capable of swallowing farmhouses and these big black blizzard dust storms in the Midwest, choking livestock and blatting out in the sun, that kind of thing. That grabs the public attention, but the real menace is this less dramatic sheet erosion that's kind of impoverishing farms everywhere.
I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
And I'm Todd Gleason. You're listening to the Closing Market Report from Illinois Public Media on this Wednesday afternoon. Our theme music is written, performed, and produced by Logan County, Illinois farmer Tim Gleason. Let's take a look at the weather forecast now for the global growing regions. Drew Lerner is here from World Weather Incorporated in Kansas City. Hello, Drew. We've got a lot of ground to cover. I want to talk first, though, about the cold blizzard conditions that are in the United States. Can you tell me about those?
Yeah, we're on our second round of blizzard conditions in the central part of the United States in the last 2 weeks. And of course, we had a serious dust storm occur both last night and again in the previous storm system late last week. And with the event last Friday, we saw that dust blow from New Mexico all the way into the heart of the Midwest, and visibilities were reduced. The winds were gusting upwards to 80 miles per hour in that event. And just after midnight last night, we saw wind speeds of 60 to 82 miles per hour in the high plains region of hard red winter wheat country. So both these last two storms have been just powerful little suckers, and it looks like they're probably going to wind down with the blizzard that's underway right now. Central Kansas, actually, there's been a lot of power outages across the central plains here, and we've lost data. But as of about 4 a.m. this morning, there was 10 inches of snow on the ground in part of west central Kansas, and the winds had been gusting between 40 and 60 miles an hour. So just a crazy mess out there. And that storm system is expected to move across Nebraska, eastern Nebraska this afternoon and the evening into northwest half of Iowa and into Wisconsin. It'll be a narrow band of blizzard conditions, but boy, if you're in the middle of that, you're going to really be socked in. Probably between 4 and 10 inches of snow will occur easily, and some of the model data thinks more than 12 inches will occur. But it will be, like I said, maybe a 250-mile wide band, and then will stretch from parts of north central Kansas and eastern Nebraska to Wisconsin. So, what I find most interesting about these last two storms is, it's not unusual to get powerful storms in the spring when you get the conflicting air masses and all that working together. But I've also been rather impressed with the amount of dry air that is prevalent in the plains behind these storm systems, and in some cases ahead of it. And these dust storms we've had the last 2 weeks have really been quite indicative of how dry it is. The relative humidity on Friday's storm system was between 1 and 12% in most of Texas, Oklahoma, and south central Kansas, and was no more than about 25% in the rest of hard red winter wheat country. The humidity with this current storm is pretty low in the southwest plains. It's a little bit higher farther north because we do have that blizzard underway. But this is all very indicative of droughty weather. We do have a drought still lingering in the northern plains and parts of the upper Midwest. And it hasn't rained in northern Mexico for months, and it's very dry in the southwestern U.S., including the southern Rocky Mountains. And west and south Texas are extremely dry. So, the weather we're seeing right now from Mexico into the central plains is disturbing in my mind because we do not see the pattern changing for the next 6 weeks. And if that's the case, we suddenly get to the 1st of May, which is when we normally start building a high pressure ridge in the middle of the United States. And with us getting to that point with already very dry soil and dry air, there's a potential that the ridge that may develop during that time period will really get going quickly. And we could see a really warm and dry problem early on in the plains and maybe a part of the western Corn Belt. Now, I won't let that go across to the eastern Midwest. I think Illinois and points over to Michigan and Ohio will be fine, at least during the planting season. But I am concerned about that drying in the west, though. I think that needs to be watched.
So usually we would say it smells like rainfall, but I suppose in this case it smells like drought?
Yeah, at least something like that. Yeah, we are getting moisture with this blizzard in Iowa and parts of eastern Nebraska, but there's moisture deficits there that have to be fixed first. And, we can keep that deep subsoil moisture lacking the moisture, and then as soon as we get a ridge, we all of a sudden bring it to the surface, and it stays dry and gets drier. So that's just something to keep in the back of our minds. I don't know that I want to get overly concerned about it, but something to keep in mind.
Now turn your attention from the United States to other regions in the northern hemisphere. Start with the Black Sea area, southern Russia and Ukraine. They had been dry. Do they continue to be that way?
Yeah, they did fairly well during the winter. First of all, the only two bouts of really cold weather that came around, the first one was not cold enough to cause any damage. The second one came around and there was plenty of snow on the ground, so there's been no winter kill. And if you recall, most of that Black Sea region from East Ukraine into Western Kazakhstan, including Russia's southern region, all were critically dry during the planting season last autumn, and so the winter crops are not well established. But without having winter kill during the winter, as long as the crop is alive, and I think it is, it has potential to turn around. Now, the weather since planting has not been terrible. There has been at least a little bit of moisture that has come and gone and will continue to come and go once in a while. But we are now getting back into the warm season. Evaporation rates are rising. We're starting to see the topsoil showing a little bit of a drying trend after getting to an adequate rating not too long ago. So with the warm temperatures and the restricted precipitation expected to continue over the next 10 days, there's a pretty good chance that this region is going to get drier again. And that's going to raise more potential trading issues, I suppose, in the marketplace. The people might get a little bit more excited about the situation there. Like I said, if they got some decent rain and kept the temperatures in a coolish range for a few weeks, there would be an excellent opportunity for new tillering to take place and the crop could recover fairly well. Not fully, but at least better.
One last place to check in on. Tell me about Brazil and its crops.
Yes, the safrinha corn crop, as we've talked in the past, should be about 20 to 25% of that crop was planted late enough to be vulnerable to yield losses. And that's assuming that we get a normal end to the monsoon, which would be mid-April, and that temperatures would be normal to maybe slightly warmer than normal as we go into late April and May. That would be in the dry season. And typically, we would want to see the ground completely saturated on the last day of the monsoonal rains. And then in a normal year, if the crop was not planted late, it would have enough time and moisture in the subsoil to support it through reproduction and filling, and they would do okay. But with 20 to 25% of that crop planted so much later than usual, there's a higher risk of lower yields. Right now, the southern half of their safrinha corn country is running a little dry. If the monsoon were to end today, I would be very concerned about moisture, being sufficient enough to carry the crop down the road for very, very long. So there's got to be an increase in rainfall. Now, don't misinterpret. I think as of today, that crop is very well established and developing well. And even though it's not raining as much as it should, maybe at this time of year, it is raining timely. And so the precipitation is mixing in with sunshine, really supporting the crop well. So it's all about what happens over the next few weeks. And when we get to mid-April, that ground has to be completely saturated to give that late 20 to 25% of the crop an opportunity to yield as well as possible. If it's a little bit dry in a part of that production region on that day, then the potential of seeing lower production becomes much higher.
That's Drew Lerner. You've been listening to the Closing Market Report. I'm Todd Gleason.